we continue to talk, if you need to get up and grab something, neither Pat nor I will be offended. We're quite casual and we're being so well taken care of by everyone at El Portal. Abel is here, the owner, and it's a family-run business, and we're happy to support him. My name is Kelsey Szamet, and I am a partner in the law firm of Kingsley Szamet. We also have Pat McNicholas here from McNicholas and McNicholas. Pat and I have known each other for a long time, and he's a really well-respected LA lawyer who knows some of the faces already from other things in the community, and he will speak in a moment. So I want you all to know a little bit about my story and how I got involved in the litigation against Edison, because I think it's really important to understand who is from the community that is here and representing you and who might not be from the community, who is also here, you know, in as part of the SCE litigation. So my family came to Altadena in the 1970s. My father was escaping the winters in Illinois and bought a house in the Meadows in the 70s. And then as my parents' family started to expand in 1980, they bought a fixer-upper on Brayburn Road over near the golf course, which is the home that my husband and my two young daughters and I still live in today. It's a beautiful, quiet neighborhood set up against the mountains with tall trees and clean air, just like you all have come to know Altadena for. And I miss it. I know you guys miss your homes so deeply. Our side of the block on Brayburn, just west of Allen, is standing. So there are 5 houses on that block that are standing, but across the street is not standing, and really going almost all the way up past Altadena Drive and Loma Alta. And then to the west of us, as you all know, all the way down to the golf course, most of those homes are lost. And then south of us as well. So our home is in the burn zone, and we have extensive smoke damage and soot and ash, and we don't know when it will be safe to live there again. I know folks who have standing structures are in this really weird limbo of what is safe to return to, what is not. And we're getting a lack of support and guidance from the government on what is safe and what rules we should be following. I actually had dinner with John Harabedian last night, and I told him about all of these concerns that we have. And he heard us, and they know. I'll be at an event with Catherine Barger soon, and I'm going to tell her all of our concerns too, because some transparency and some discussion about safety in our community is really pressing. Obviously, folks who don't have standing structures have many of these same concerns about safety and cleanup and phase 1 and phase 2. And I hope that you come to know we're a resource to answer as many questions as we can about all of these things. Some of it is just us taking care of each other and sharing information as a community on the ground about what we're doing. How are you dealing with your insurance adjuster? What kind of information has gotten you to get a 12-month lease approved? What kind of information do you need to bring an industrial hygienist into your structure or onto your property to look at your soil? You know, Pat will say this too. We are our best advocates if we take care of each other and we talk to each other and we compare notes, block by block, neighbors by neighbors, just sharing information. You know, I was talking about this with Manny. He's really frustrated with his insurance. He can't get a call back. I said, Manny, pitch a fit. Tell them, I would like to speak to your manager. I would like to speak to your supervisor. I need you to elevate this. Oh, by the way, I want a new adjuster. I'm not happy with my adjuster, right? These are tips and tricks that we can all learn just by talking to each other, advocating for ourselves what worked. And as Manny said, it's really exhausting. It's really exhausting. And none of us asked for this. And this isn't how it should be, because we have been paying into the system for a long time and expected more and expected better, but it is what it is. So we have to take advantage of the resources that we have locally talking to each other. So Pat and I are going to kind of go into what we consider sort of a 4-point recovery plan in moving forward. And the number one thing is what I just touched on, and it's emotional health and community and taking care of each other. And I think that that is foremost before you start to tackle all of these other things, because we have a long road ahead. We all do. This is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be resolved overnight, whether you lost your home completely, whether you have a standing structure, or whether you're even further removed and you're a renter who can't get your landlord to pay for remediation. That's not an easy road either, right? We all have a long road ahead of us, and we have to take care of each other and come together and eat and drink margaritas. So that is why we are here, right? We are here at a local family-owned business to eat together, to talk, to hug one another, to share notes, and margaritas are always helpful in these situations. So, you know, Pat always says, like, we've all paid in to our community through, you know, taking care of our properties, paying our property taxes, showing up and supporting local businesses. We've all paid in, and now it's time for us all to be able to draw on that bank of each other and take help from one another, right? I'm such a hypocrite. It's very hard for me to accept help and to ask for help when I need it, because I like to do things on my own. That's not the right approach here, because it's a long and lonely road if you don't take help when it's offered. When friends invite you over for dinner to give you a home cooked meal, that's what we all want right now, right? Everyone says, what can I do? I don't want to eat at the hotel. I don't want to eat at a restaurant. I want a home cooked meal with the people that I love. That is what you can do for me. And so we have to take that. We have to take what people are willing to do and willing to offer us and not feel any sense of guilt or imposition. We had dear friends of ours care for our dogs for 6 weeks. And I felt so guilty because I'm sure they were peeing inside the house and whatever, you know? And she said, the least I can do is take care of your dogs for 6 weeks while you get adjusted. And that was really hard for me to accept that help, but I'm really glad I did, because it was one less thing that I had to worry about. So small and big things are what is going to get us all through this. For me, the other really big part of emotional health and well-being, and I think you guys are seeing it today, is what a sense of love and community and positivity have we all seen come out of this. I think everybody knows what a special place Altadena is. That's why we all live in this community. But I feel like we are doubling down on that and tripling down on that in terms of just showing up for each other and taking care of each other. And it fills my heart every day to be able to use my professional expertise to take care of all of you. It has given me so much purpose. And at the risk of sounding sappy, it's really the honor of my lifetime that my professional background happens to be of service and benefit to the community. And throwing myself into this has been life-changing in a good way. So we have to take care of each other and accept help. The second thing that I think is really important in this kind of road to recovery is making sure that you have got your insurance claims initiated, which I think probably everybody in the room by this point has. Figuring out what your policy looks like, working through that policy and the language of the policy. If you don't have insurance, obviously there's you know, going to be a different path there. But that's really important. And I touched on this before. Insurance is not stepping up in the way that we hoped that they would, right? Whether you have State Farm or Farmers or Mercury or Cal Fair, every story I hear is the same. I would say Cal Fair folks are probably having the most difficult time just getting people on the phone, getting any type of contribution towards remediation, getting any type of contribution towards alternative living. I think it's a really, really frustrating process. So if you guys have specific questions about the insurance process or claims, or you need resources there, Pat and I are available. You know, a lot of it is sharing tips and tricks amongst each other, what kind of language you can use, what kind of requests you can make, what kind of things you can put in writing to your insurer to help move this process along. The number one thing I would tell all of you is just document, document, document. Because I think most of us will see that we have different adjusters starting to get assigned to us in the next 30 or 60 days. A lot of the adjusters that came in from out of the area were brought in on an emergency basis to manage the situation and may not be our long-term adjusters. I talked to a person this week who is now on her third adjuster, and we are, you know, 6 weeks out from what happened. So the adjusters are not taking good notes of what promises they have made you and what they have told you. And if they said that they're going to cover your industrial hygienist, they are not taking notes about that. So you have to. And again, is it exhausting and unfair and not right? 100%, but it is what it is. So my husband and I actually started a Google document. It's a living document. Every time we talk to the insurance company, we update our note, and we can both update the note, and we upload it onto our insurance portal every time we update it. And we send a friendly little email to our agent, and we say, hey, Sam, we wanted you to get our updated notes. And he's not happy about it, but that's okay, Sam. You're still going to get my regular updates about what my phone conversations, what has been promised to me, what I've said, what I have asked for. So the other two, I think, really good tips that I have learned from clients lately are, one, if you find it emotionally exhausting to write out how you're feeling and how you're doing, take voice memos or take iPhone videos of yourself. It's a really good tool if you can't sit down and write. And I actually started doing that myself, and it's helpful. Was it a good day? Was it a bad day? How are you feeling today? How are the kids doing? A memory that kind of, you know, when you're brushing your teeth and something pops into your mind about what happened, go do a quick voice note or jot it down on your iPhone, wherever you can. If you're the person who writing it out helps, like one notebook that you can run to and have your thoughts organized, I think is really helpful. And I learned this week, and I thought it was genius, and I didn't do it, but I'll pass it on. It came from a Paradise survivor who started a Gmail email address solely for the loss and could put all the documents in one place. So the address is literally 123 Main Street at gmail.com. And that is the address he gives out for anything related to the loss and insurance, invoices, anything like that. And he communicates with me through that email address. I thought it was brilliant. I didn't take that advice, but I would consider you to think about it, because it just is a repository for information. So we've kind of touched on the insurance process briefly. Again, we're here as a resource. I'm going to tell you that we're launching a webinar series. It's going to be a lunchtime series every 2 weeks, where we are bringing in subject matter experts to help you all and to help me. And our first one is this Thursday with Sydney Greenspan from 12 to 12:30. She's a second or third generation public adjuster in LA. Is she third generation, Pat? I think she's third generation, third. She is a powerhouse, and she is a subject matter expert in public adjusting. And she is not here to sell her services to us. They are not looking to bring on new clients. Trust me, they're barely surviving, but they're here to educate us. What is a public adjuster? What does that process look like? Do you maybe need one? Is it too early to even consider getting a public adjuster? So that is really another piece of educating our community and recovering together. We're going to start with Sydney Greenspan, and then 2 weeks after that, we're going to bring in a local scientist who spent much of his career at JPL, but is now a professor and is out taking his own samples in the neighborhood. His name is Josh Fisher. He's going to come talk to us. He lives in Eagle Rock. He's going to talk to us about what he thinks is safe, what he considers to be appropriate for his young children. A few weeks after that, we're going to bring in a bad faith lawyer to talk to you guys about what does bad faith mean? What does it look like? Are these things that we need to be looking out for in the process as we deal with our adjusters? So I think that that's a really another big piece of just educating ourselves, taking care of ourselves, taking care of the community. The third kind of stop, I think, on the path to recovery after you've tackled some of these other big things is housing, right? Housing is a big issue for all of us. I've talked to many of you in the room who are starting to get housing figured out, longer term, shorter term. What I'm hearing most people doing is they're having to leave the area. They're in Norwalk or Granada Hills or Laverne if they're able to get a longer term rental. Downtown LA, apartments are still available in downtown LA. So maybe we have to cast sort of a broader net when we're thinking about where we're going to be living as we get through this. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. But housing, I think, at least for me, is a really big piece of just having a sense of what the next 6 months are going to look like. What are the next 12 months going to look like? We just moved into our rental on Monday, and I had to kick and scream to get a 12-month lease approved. Let me know if you need any tips there. I have some. I can show you what documents I sent to my adjuster. I can tell you what language I used. Yes, I requested a new adjuster, by the way, and that got the heat turned up a little bit. So we got our 12-month lease approved and we moved in on Monday. So I personally have a 12-month plan. That's all I have right now, but that's helping our family figure out what the next 12 months look like. Because I know most of us are thinking day to day still, and we have to start thinking, week to week and month to month, because we're going to go crazy if we don't, right? We need some sort of a plan. Housing is big. The other thing, you all are very sophisticated people, so I know you know this, but really think about how you're going to make your alternative living money stretch. That's a big piece of this, is how are you going to make that money stretch for a 2 or 3 year rebuild process, before we're realistically going to potentially be able to return to the area if structures are lost. So, just because you got approved for $12,000 a month, for example, I was just talking to a friend, they're looking at maximum $6,000 a month because their plan is to try to make their ALE budget last for 36 months. So just backing into that budget as best you can is really important. And again, if you have specific questions or concerns that you want to talk about, come find me after, and I'm happy to do that. So the next piece, which is a really big piece of all of this, is the restorative justice piece. And Pat's going to come over and join me and talk for a minute. But what does restorative justice mean in the Altadena community? So I think that it is a multifaceted answer. And one part of it is the monetary part, and we will talk about that. But another really big part is the accountability piece, right? Will it help us as a community to feel safer and have less anxiety and feel more comfortable returning to our neighborhood if there is accountability? And I think the answer is yes. I was talking to a woman who survived Paradise, and she was talking about her daughter, and her daughter developed a lot of anxiety and felt really unsafe at home and felt really unsafe in the community. But ultimately, having a wrongdoer held accountable for that fire really helped her daughter have a sense of justice for the wrongdoing, right? Like, wrongdoers can get held accountable in our communities. And I think that that's a really important and powerful part of what we're seeking to do in the litigation against SoCal Edison, is accountability for making a lot of bad decisions that led to what happened to our community on January 7th. The other piece, before I let Pat talk, for me, is how can we improve safety in our community going forward? As we return, for me personally, undergrounding is huge, right? Undergrounding lines is huge. And how can we fight for that? How can we push for that? That's not just going to be a part of the litigation, that will be a piece of the consortium, but we need, as a community, to push for that, vocalize it, fight for it. We need Catherine Barger online, which she is. We need to be calling the Cal OES, the California Office of Emergency Services. They have representatives in the area who this is their job. This is a big part of their job. It's a wing of Governor Newsom's office that they are trying to think about how can this be avoided 20 years from now? How can we avoid rebuilding our community and having another tragedy 20 or 30 years from now? So that piece for me is huge, is what can we do to make our community safer? And not just Altadena. Of course, we want to protect Altadena, but other vulnerable foothill communities. How can Edison be forced to make better decisions in other vulnerable foothill communities, La Crescenta, Glendora, so that nothing of this scope and scale ever happens to anyone ever again? Because obviously, as humans, that's really important, right? We have to protect our community and we have to advocate and protect for other surrounding communities. So I think for me, the restorative justice piece, of course, the financial component is huge, right? That's part of how our civil system works, is that when there is a wrongdoer, the wrongdoer transfers money to the victims to help restore the victims to where they were before the injustice happened. And money is not going to bring back the Altadena that we knew and loved exactly the way that it was, but it will put us in a position to rebuild and come back and feel safe and reinvest in grocery stores and local restaurants and our neighborhoods and our communities. And money is just a part of being able to afford to rebuild. And that's just a reality that we have to accept here. All of us in this room are probably dramatically underinsured. And it's nothing any of us did wrong. It's the nature of the beast. 95% of Altadena is underinsured. 95% of LA County is probably underinsured, honestly. But it's nothing, people have come up to me and said, did we do something wrong? We didn't push for enough coverage. No, none of us did anything wrong. I have a unique story. Our household, my brother and sister are here actually. Our household, our family household went through a single house fire in 2007. So my dad went through this process in 2007. It was a long and difficult process. And from that, I learned, oh, I want as much possible coverage as they will ever give me. And I pushed and I pushed and I said, I want more. I want extended this. I want rebuild. And my home is probably 50% underinsured, if not maybe a third of what we would really need to rebuild that home if that home was gone. So it's nothing any of us did wrong. We're just underinsured. That's the reality. And the litigation against SCE should step in and help us bridge that gap to be able to rebuild and or repair or restore money that we came out of pocket for cleaning or, industrial hygienists that we're not getting reimbursed for, et cetera. So I'm going to let Pat come and talk about that. All right, you need this one too.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you for coming. My name is Pat McNicholas, and what Kelsey said is absolutely true. I want to talk to you a little bit about why the local issue is so important, then I want to give you the big picture. My ultimate goal here today, is one thing, is that when you go home at the end of the day, you go to bed tonight, when your head hits the pillow, that you will all feel a little bit better about where this whole thing is going. And the way I want to communicate that to you is by giving you information, which will give you confidence and allow you to develop a plan. I know you feel like there's a lot of uncertainty, because there is. But be that as it may, there's a lot of things that are the same in all these fires. Right now, I'm currently working on 10 wildfires up and down the state. So ranging from the North Bay complex in 2017 to Thomas, which was down here in 2017, to the Paradise Fire 2018, to Woolsey and everything in between. So we've put together a team of lawyers with a heavy emphasis on the local issues. So I've known Kelsey and Eric. Eric Kingsley went to school with my brother Matt at Loyola. Can I close this? So the local issue is important. It's also important that you have lawyers that have done this before. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that, but we currently have about 15,000 wildfire clients. We anticipate we'll probably at the end of the day have about 5,000 from this fire. I think in this fire we have individual clients. This is not a class action, about 3,000 clients at this point in time. We were in court this week. We're going to be back in court March 17th for our first status conference. But getting back to why local is important. And first of all, speaking of local, we have some first responders here. If you guys could give us a wave. We'd all like to thank you. Gary. And they're near and dear to our heart because at McNicholas and McNicholas, we have an area of practice called first responder law. So we have quite a bit of affinity for our first responders. And I do want to say in this fire, I'm going to give you the global picture because it comes up so much every day. You may as well rename the LA Times to the Wildfire Times, okay? Because we pick that newspaper up and it's dominated by issues from the Palisades and out in Altadena, okay? So it's really important. You're going to hear and see and feel so many different things, but focus on the things that really matter. And people always say this was so preventable. It was. And they talked about first responders and the water and the vegetation. So this is where we are today. This is a problem that has been about 50 or 60 years in the making. Going back to the 60s, when the utilities began to expand their capabilities, their capacities. And at that time, what we had was appropriate for the situation. Since that time, unfortunately, the utilities have never updated. They've never upgraded their infrastructure, their systems, or their culture, all right? I was sworn in 1986. I know that's a long time ago. And the first area of practice was I did major air crash litigation, disasters. And most of the firms that did that in the 80s went out of business because during that time period, the entire aviation industry, they committed to a culture of safety. The manufacturers invested in technology, in new equipment, in training, and they worked with the FAA, the NTSB, the fixed-based operators, so that globally, the aviation industry created one of the safest endeavors ever known to humankind, which was air travel. Unfortunately, last week we had a few bumps in that, but few setbacks. But if you look at what they did, the investments they've made, it's been incredible and it worked. And at the same time, utilities really did nothing. And all of these, transmission wires and delivery systems, they are not upgraded and they have huge flaws in them and they're not really capable of keeping up. Okay, during that same period of time, our water delivery systems were not designed to fight these wildfires. There's a significant issue in the Palisades because the Santa Ynez Reservoir, which should have been filled, was not. There's been issues in the newspaper about former chief not dispatching fire trucks, but the fire departments, the water delivery systems, the infrastructure, the density were not equipped to fight wildfires, especially in an urban setting. So the fire department can't come and put these out, not when you have 90 miles an hour, 90-mile-an-hour winds. So all of these things have come together: population, vegetation management, antiquated systems, antiquated infrastructure, and here we are today. That's where we are today. The good news is where I think we're going. This is no doubt an historic moment in California, and particularly in Southern California. I was talking to my dad. He's been here his whole life. I'm actually a third-generation Angelino myself. And we're trying to think, what have been the biggest moments in Southern California history? In my lifetime, we had the Watts riots. Most of you probably weren't alive, and I barely remember that. We had the Rodney King riots. We've had some wildfires. I'm from Malibu. I've evacuated from too many to count, had a partial burn down in Woolsey. But those have been sort of isolated. We did have the meltdown, which the whole country had in 2008. We had 9/11. But to me, this is our 9/11. This is our wake-up call. And there's going to have to be changes. So the quality and character of a community like Altadena and the Eaton Fire era, you can't restore that. That is the tragic and unfortunate part. But the good part is there is a shot, a chance, and I think it's going to happen for a new beginning, a brand new beginning. What does that mean? You can now have building codes, you can have roads, you can have infrastructure, which includes water delivery systems that give our first responders an opportunity to put these out. You can have safe spaces, you can have defensible spaces. So the community is going to be newer. It's going to happen. And in certain respects, that's going to be better. Although I do recognize, and I've seen other communities that have been built, they've been very happy. People do miss the nostalgia. You can't, rebuild a house that was built in the 20s. It's not going to have the same quality and character. But your communities will be back. The next thing people want to know is, how long is that going to take? That's a tough question, but here's my best estimate based upon everything I've seen. It's fluid every day, depending on what you read, who you talk to. I'm going to be up in San Francisco and then Sacramento. I'm meeting with representatives on these issues, March 15th, to discuss these things. But there's a huge push, really strong push. And John Harbedian, I love, he went to my high school, Loyola. If there's anybody from Loyola High School, go Cubs. So they're aware of it. They can feel it. They know, the politicians know, from the governor to the assembly people to the senators, that they are going to be measured by how they performed in this disaster. So they're acutely aware of it, and that's a benefit to you. The other thing people want to ask, how's this all going to get paid for? So we're going to talk about Southern California Edison. I'm going to talk about some government funding. The state has committed a huge amount of funds at this point in time. Unfortunately, the state can't print money, but there's other things they can do. They can bond and things like that to earmark funds to help both the Palisades and Altadena rebuild. I just saw that Governor Newsom made a request for $40 billion for the Southern California wildfires. We'll see how that goes. But all in all, when you're talking about the big picture, I would say for you to have a real sense of normalcy, probably about 5 years. I think the rebuild timeframe is going to be 3 to 5 years, and you can help your own cause. Again, going back to what Kelsey said, a lot of this is so local. The contractors. We're right now talking about the hazardous waste removal. We're talking about debris removal. Your, living situation and your quality of living is so important at this point in time. So these things have to be squared away. I always talk about there's, knowledge and then there's local knowledge. The local knowledge is going to be hugely important because you're going to be more aware and you guys give us a lot of feedback as lawyers as to what's going on, what FEMA's doing, what they're not doing, what the other boots on the ground, who's performing, who's not, the individual contractors who are doing well. But stay in each other's ear and you can really, really help each other. Most of you, I think, can be, for those of you who unfortunately lost a home, I think that you can begin rebuilding within 3 years, maybe shorter, but within 3 years. And I think you're going to see huge progress in the 3 to 5 year range. So I evacuated Woolsey in 2018. That was November. I was back in about 2 to 3 months because my house only partially burned. About a third of the houses on my street burned. All the houses have been rebuilt except for 1 or 2, but the 1 or 2 that haven't been rebuilt were because the people really, I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't paying attention. I don't know if they're never going to rebuild, but you have an input on that. You need to stay on top of it and make sure that you're following the steps necessary. Again, your quality of life, getting your ALE, getting your living situation. Super important at this point in time. Talking about ALE and public adjusters, people always ask that question, should I get a public adjuster? Here's my general advice, and it can be very personal as to whether you want to do it. If you have a house that was burned down or even partially burned down, you probably do not need a public adjuster because everybody is underinsured. There might be a few exceptions. Everybody's underinsured, and that's intentional by the insurance companies, okay? So public adjusters, I think you can use them. Greenspan is hugely reputable. I think they're probably the biggest in the state, by the way. A particular is your personal property loss. But if your house burnt down, your personal property loss is going to exceed the limits because it's based upon a ratio as to how much your house costs, okay, and the value of your house. So, but there are situations where I think the most important is the contents because it is so demoralizing, it's psychologically devastating. It's just too emotional and time consuming and people don't want to do it. So if you feel the need because of that, then Greenspan is certainly somebody good to go with. But whatever you do, what you want to do is, first of all, max out your insurance money. Max out your money. No lawyer should take any part of that. All right? No lawyer should take any part of it. Speaking of lawyers, in my opinion, you should not be paying more than 25% to pay a lawyer for these fires. I know that some people are charging up to 40. We went straight to 25%. We think it's fair. We think it's rational given this situation. So get all of your insurance money and make sure you're cutting a good deal on the retainer that you signed with your lawyer. You talked about restorative justice. What does it mean in this context? So we're in court right now. Yes, we're suing Southern California Edison. Yes, we have a high degree of confidence that we are going to be successful. We're paying close attention to what I would refer to as the liability portion of this case. How do we demonstrate that Southern California Edison is responsible? I'm assuming that everybody in this room has been paying attention and is pretty up to speed on what happened up in Eaton Canyon. So we have all that information. We have other evidence because we've had our experts out inspecting the scene. We have other information that isn't open to the public, but is available because they have digital recordings of what they call events or anomalies on the line. So there's a number of theories as to exactly precisely how the fire started, but all roads lead to Southern California Edison, okay? So when you're talking about restorative justice, what does that mean? That means we need to get you back to a place as close as we can to where you were the day before this fire happened. And in order to do that, we have to make up the difference between what your insurance pays and where it's short. And economically, we know based upon because of the fact that we've done this so many times, most people are about 50% underinsured. Now, in any individual case, you can have a little more, you could have a little less, but that's basically where it is. If all the claims were covered by insurance, lawyers wouldn't be standing here like me. And you wouldn't have this deluge of lawyer advertising that's being dumped into the state. By the way, just as an aside, we estimate that there will be about $250 to $500 million spent on lawyer advertising for these cases. And more than half of it will come from out of state, just so you know. So when you see things like, West Coast lawyers, Southern California lawyers, LA wildfire lawyers, generally, those aren't lawyers from the area. So I think you should be cognizant of that. Look, there's going to be, I tell people this all the time, there's going to be a handful of really good lawyers, and they're already on leadership. Our team is on leadership, and we're going to shape and drive the litigation. Then there's going to be a bunch of lawyers who are just going to be tag-alongs. And you want to be with a firm that is in a leadership position, because we're going to drive the litigation, and because we control so much of Southern California Edison's liability. They're just trying to buy off their liability, okay? They look at this, we have revenues and we have liabilities. They want to purchase this lawsuit, this case, the Eaton Fire. They want to know how much is it going to cost, and they want to negotiate on the price. They want to drive it down, and they want to purchase that, okay? That's the way they look at it. And there's a big process we go through. So for restorative justice, it means we have to get you back to whole to make up the difference between what your insurance does not pay and what your actual out-of-pocket losses are. You got to rebuild your house. You're missing clothes. You're missing all sorts of personal property. You're missing out structures. You are missing a lot of vegetation that burned, okay? All of these things have to be given back to you to make you whole. In addition, as you all know, because you're living it, it has been a huge disruption in your life. It has changed your lifestyle. It has changed the quality of living, and it will be an event in your life that'll change you forever. You need to be compensated for that. So that is part of this. So I come from a trial lawyer family. I've spent most of my life, and certainly all of my adult life, in and out of courtrooms. And people always want to know, because I'm the person that stands up and asks the jury for money, well, what is this case worth? And I'm talking to a jury, especially when it comes to emotional distress, which really doesn't describe what you're going through. But I generally don't go into it because it's not helpful, all the different things and how devastating this is. But jurors want to know, why should I give all this money? What's the point? If I give you 10 million, 100 million, a million, it's only going to change so much, which is true. But there's a reason we call this not the civil system. It is called the civil justice system. And the focus is on the justice. If somebody comes into court who's badly damaged, and a jury says, look, the defendant's wrong. We love you. You're a great person. You lost your leg, and here you go. Here's $50. Okay. That is not restorative justice. In fact, that would be a slap in the face. So there is a portion of the money that is a societal recognition that there's been a horrible wrong that has been committed. And we, the jury, are speaking on behalf of society to say, we recognize the wrong and we're here to make you whole. So yes, it's about the money, but the money also means something. And that's true in this case. You're talking about bury the lines, which would also be a restorative, justice. And we've been trying to get them to do that. Pacific Gas and Electric has already embarked on doing that. I think they said they've buried 2,000 miles of lines. I can't remember what it is. But their CEO, after they went into bankruptcy, that was after we did the Paradise Fire, And we settled for 13.5 billion for the ratepayers, for the consumers, the homeowners. But they had to pay more money. They had to pay the government back for all the damage they did. And they had to pay the insurance companies back. So they lost a lot of money. They lost about $30 billion. And their CEO finally said, you know what? I can do the math. It's cheaper for us to bury the lines than to keep lighting the fifth largest economy in the world on fire. So they have begun to do that. Southern California Edison really has not. And that's one of the benefits that you all will have as a result of the Eaton fire, and hopefully in the Palisades too. Although in the Palisades, a lot of places where that fire happened, the lines were actually buried. Of course, that wasn't where the fire started, but you will have that opportunity to do that here. So restorative justice means it makes you whole economically. There's a recognition of a horrible wrong that's been committed. Don't expect them to admit it though. The dollars will have to speak for themselves. And you can create a community for the future with better infrastructure. They can bury the lines, water delivery, roads, safe areas to fight fire. So all of these things can happen. So I guess the next question is the lawsuit. What's going on? Where are we today? Where's it all going? So we've already formed the leadership committees. We've been in court. What we've really been in court is to prevent Southern California Edison from taking away the evidence, from removing evidence. And by the way, when they re-energized their lines, I know that they said we have to because we have to restore them. That can damage or remove evidence in and of itself. And they said, we're going to go in and remove all this stuff. We said, no, you're not. So we were in court to make sure that didn't happen. Then they said, guess what? We have to do a scrubbing. I don't think that was in the newspaper. We have to go in and wash these substations. And we said, no, you don't. So that is all now being punted over to March 17th. So those issues are going to be discussed. And we're going to start talking about how the litigation's going to be managed. So there's going to be a leadership team. And then what we'll do is we'll structure the litigation. So earlier I mentioned we have 3,000 clients at this point in time. We don't file 3,000 separate complaints. How many complaints will be filed in this case? I'm guessing 40 to 50. I mean, the evacuation zones, the mandatory evacuation zones were huge in and of themselves. The smoke and ash damage, then you have, renters, you have partial burn downs, you have full burn downs. So you have this whole category. So what we'll do is we'll have a litigation schedule. And part of the litigation schedule will be, how are we handling discovery in the case? So what's discovery? Discovery is really a formal process in litigation where information is exchanged. And when it's exchanged in formal litigation, it is done under oath. So they produce documents. They have to have somebody that's going to say, verify, these are the documents. I'm the person most knowledgeable. And they produce them. And we're producing everything you asked for. Normally, we would have to produce our client for a deposition. I think most of you know what a deposition is, where you're put under oath and everything you say is taken down and you're cross-examined. That's not going to happen in this case, okay? Our clients normally would have to answer written interrogatories, again, under oath. They're formal, they're legalistic. That's not going to happen in this case. So for purposes of your planning, the time that we estimate for the people we represent, it's about 2 to 3 hours of your time. That'll occur on the phone. It can occur talking on your phone. It can occur digitally on your phone. It can occur on your computer, or we have people that you can sit down with if you feel more comfortable doing that. So this is really an important aspect. It's kind of a mundane point, but it's a really important aspect of the litigation, because the firm you work with has to have the means, methods, experience, protocols, and money to prosecute the case, not only on liability. We have a huge amount of information that we need to get from you. So what we've done since 2017 is we put together a team, and between all these firms, we have about, I think, 120 to 130 people that are what I'd say client forward. That means they're reaching out to you, They're calling you, they're receiving inquiries, and you will have somebody that is assigned to your case. You'll have a case manager. Then there's lawyers that oversee the case managers. Then ultimately, it ends up on my desk if there's a bigger issue. I'm usually dealing with the litigation. So the information gathering is important because it has to obviously be digitally stored in an organized fashion so we can then retrieve it and then put it into what we call a narrative and ultimately a settlement package. And it has to be prepared in a way that maximizes your settlement. So there's two things that are going to maximize your settlement: the information you give us, the way we present it, and who your lawyers are in the litigation, because ultimately we will be presenting it, the lawyers will, to the defense and to a mediator. You can anticipate that the litigation will last 24 to 36 months. Southern California Edison will want it to go longer, but we anticipate that's how long it's going to go. So how do we drive the litigation without them stalling it out? What happens is in the CMO that this judge will issue, probably not this time, but 2 or 3 steps down the road, in the case management order, there'll be bellwether trials that are set. What are bellwether trials? They're just cases that are selected. Obviously, we're not going to try 50,000 cases. So there could be a couple of burn downs. There could be a couple partial burn downs. There could be a couple of mandatory leavebacks. There could be smoke and ash claims. And then there's some other business claims and things like that. So these bellwethers get set, and that ultimately drives the litigation because they don't want to go to trial. It's axiomatic in my world of trial law that trial dates resolve cases. It's either going to resolve one way or the other. If you have a trial, you're going to trial and the case is going to get resolved. If you have a trial date and the defendant doesn't want to go to trial, they're going to settle. But that's how we drive the cases, and that's why you need real lawyers, not billboards on the 405 on the side of buses, that can go into court and drive these cases home. So just let me give you the big picture, the recap. Max out your insurance dollars. If you have a total burn down, not likely you need a public adjuster. Otherwise, you can look at it and do a risk benefit analysis, but you want to maximize that. Make sure that you have a good living situation because you're going to be in it for a while, especially if you have a burn down. I was talking to a Dr. Sam over there, and they're in a burn area, but their house has survived, fortunately. But it could take, to get the whole area done, I'm thinking about a year. You have to have the hazardous waste removed. You do not want to move back into that. Then you have to have the debris removal. So use your ALE, but have a good living situation and then start working on your future. What does the future mean? If you have a house that's been burned down, you need a contractor. We have professionals that we work with that will do things like give bid reports, that will talk about trees that may be salvageable or not salvageable, all these different types of damage experts. You all don't really have to worry about the liability phase because we have our own electricians, arson experts that deal with how fires start, origin and cause experts, a bunch of metallurgists, a bunch of different experts that do the forensic analysis on this. So in the end, the way that this relationship works is, in this case, we take 25%. So if you received $100, we would get $25. And there's going to be costs that come out. So we estimate, because the costs are going to be in the millions of dollars, but for each individual client who has a burn down, I can tell you by way of experience, and again, some can be more expensive depending on the particular issue. For example, some people have collectibles. We have to hire an expert that's, has to evaluate your gun collection or your tool collection or your art collection, can make it more expensive. But generally, it's about 2%. So on $100, it would be $20. No, that'll be $2, sorry. So I went to law school, couldn't do math. Okay. We have other people that do the accounting in the firm, not me, so don't worry about it. And that's how it works. The reality is because we have so many clients, the individual cost compared to your recovery is pretty small. Your cost is pretty small in doing all these. Next question people generally ask, well, how do these get resolved? We're not going to have 50,000 people going to individual mediations. It really depends on the case. So in the North Bay complex in Paradise, because PG&E was in bankruptcy, there's a bankruptcy trustee, there's a whole system set up. And we basically submitted, everybody submitted on a rolling basis, a demand package for each and every client. There was a panel of former judges, former attorneys that then made awards on it. And there was an appellate process. In Woolsey and Thomas, it's been different. We generally, as attorneys, go with a group. So let's say we're going to do 50 of your clients at this mediation, and we go as a group and we do it. Do you have to be present at the mediation? No. Are most clients present? No. Do some clients want to be present? Yes, but those are usually the clients we have that are lawyers. So, and they make the process go much longer. Are there any lawyers in the group here? Okay, good. So that's basically the big picture as to how this litigation is gonna go. And I think that, you know, my predictions as to how this is going to happen will be pretty close. Anything unusual? These are obviously historic fires, unprecedented in the amount of damage, about, you know, depending on who you ask, 250 to $300 billion. That's a lot, but the rest of the country has a vested income in Southern California having a good outcome because so much of our economy is dependent on it. So now I'd just like to ask, does anybody have any questions? Yes. Yes. They're not going bankrupt. There's a fund, as you know, thank you for the question. AB 1054, which we created after the PG&E bankruptcy. So at this point in time, depending on who you ask, there's about $15 billion in this fund, which is set up to backstop wildfires just like this. There's 3 utilities which are allowed to avail themselves of that fund: Southern California, San Diego Gas and Electric, SoCal Edison, and PG&E. And that amount is going up all the time. So we figure by the time that resolution comes, there'll be about $20 billion in that fund. Southern California Edison's exposure for this fire is going to be below that, far below that. And they have the wherewithal to probably pay $2 to $3 billion, although because they are part of the fund, their liability gets capped. So we don't see bankruptcy happening for Southern California Edison. Yes.
But it's larger than that, right? Because just like, and you have a set of lawyers, bad faith, right? Well, this guy has been in power since 2016, right?
Which guy?
Sorrow, right? Edison International, right?
Okay.
So here's a guy that they've had multiple fires. How come he is still in power? And how come that isn't considered bad faith?
Okay. So the question is, why is the CEO of the parent company still in power? Okay, I'm going to answer that one the best I can. So what you have basically is a monopoly by utilities. In this particular instance, we're talking about Southern California Edison. How does Edison operate? They really operate somewhat at the pleasure of the California PUC. The problem is the PUC is loaded with people who are former executives of the utilities. So, I mean, this is a really good question because some people, and up in NorCal, they didn't want PG&E bailed out. Like, why are we bailing out PG&E to reward bad conduct? And that comment actually has a lot of merit. So what do I think has to happen? I think we have to have a concerted effort, and I like the aviation model as to what happened in aviation. the aviation industry came together by and large because they realized, it's a scary thing for the flying public. And people will stop getting on airplanes if this keeps happening. It also gets very expensive when one of those big planes go down because their exposure is huge. So, and again, harkening back to something you said, Kelsey, one of the ancillary side effects of these cases is so that they understand that they can't continue doing business this way. It's too expensive. So PG&E has already started changing. There hasn't really been there've been fires up there. I mean, I'm on the Dixie fire. That was against PG&E, and that was 1 million acres, although it didn't have as much damage because there's not as many people up there. But that is what's going to have to happen. There has been discussion, and this is above my pay grade at this point in time, of having California take over a utility such as Southern California Edison. Again, above my pay grade as to whether that would be better or worse, but your question's legitimate. And I think ultimately, in any other lawsuit we do, I think one of the things I really enjoy about doing it, I'm born in a trial lawyer family, a lot of the safety innovations come from lawsuits. If you look at like automobiles, seatbelts, or because of lawsuits, 3-point seatbelt, airbags, anti-lock brakes, because it's cheaper for them to do that, as opposed to the Ford Pinto case where they found the memo where they said it's cheaper to, have people die and pay the wrongful death cases. Fortunately, now I'm really getting off on a tangent. Because of the digital age, it's really changed because now we can get things like emails and we can get things like text. But before, we didn't have information available like we do now, especially from inside the company. So from your lips to God's ears, it'll all change, and hopefully this will be the major catalyst for it. Any other questions? Yes.
Is there any part of the lawsuit that would have involved, obviously all the insurance companies, knowing that we were all underinsured? Would any of that be part of the lawsuit?
Okay, so yes, is the short answer. So in the Palisades, that was not utility cost. The working theory there is that it's a rekindle, which is actually not an unknown phenomenon where a wildfire or a major fire occurs, and then days later, you can actually have it weeks and sometimes months later, because of weather conditions, it reignites. And that is the working theory. There's a fire from fireworks, apparently January 1, and it rekindled on January 7th because of the high winds. So there I'm working with actually 2 other firms, including Singleton Schreiber, who's one of our partner firms in this case, and another firm that specializes in bad faith against insurance companies, on a theory that insurance companies intentionally underinsure people, and it's a misrepresentation. Okay, so we are working on that theory in that fire. So how that relates to this case, we've been talking about it, but if you have a case here in Eaton, because you have a utility to sue, which everyone says, well, that's fortunate, but the unfortunate thing is if there wasn't a utility, you probably wouldn't have had the fire anyways. But so if we cover your damages in this case, there's not going to be any need for the bad faith case. There will be some instances, but as far as, if you have a burn down and you get made whole here, you probably wouldn't need to participate in that case. And those theories are really highly individualized because you have to look at every person's policy, what representations were made, what representations were not made. And so it's pretty rigorous. So the short answer is yes, and then I gave you the longer answer.
I'd say if you don't do that, what's to say insurance companies won't keep doing the same thing? Just keep underinsuring people unless somebody, brings it up to light and makes a change on it.
That's why we're going to sue them in the Palisades. But look, if we sue someone, we sue them for a reason. Like there's some people that I know that filed lawsuits in the Palisades. And my kids grew up there, their school burned down, their church burned down. We know a lot of people in the Palisades, and I've done town halls for them to explain why it's not a good idea. The bottom line is there's immunities there. So this is their only avenue available, is the bad faith. On the broader question is, why would they not do it again? We need insurance reform. So that's number one. Number two, it's tough. They have a really, really strong lobby. So I'm on the board of our, political action committee, and everyone thinks that we have this hugely powerful lobby, formerly known as the trial lawyers, now the consumer attorneys of California. In any given election, if we can raise $6 million, we're doing well. They have unlimited money to spend on these issues. So, and a lot of people don't like what Ricardo Lara is doing. So we can do it legislatively. Other people are talking about the federal government having a position. I'm going to hear Adam Schiff speak on that March 15th about what the federal government's role might be with respect to these insurance companies. But the bottom line is these insurance companies want to be in California. They want to be here. And do they have losses sometimes? Yes, but you have to define what a loss is. So any business can have losses over a short period of time. They have underwriting, they have reserves. So they'll say, we're losing money in California, but they're not losing money in California. They can have a year where they have a bad year, but they write a lot of other insurance in this state. So State Farm, I have an umbrella policy, I have a rental policy, a homeowner's policy, I have a bunch of kids. So I have a lot of insurance. And my broker called and said, they're going to cancel your insurance because you live in Malibu. And I was like, really? So I talked to someone, manager there, and he called and said, no, they're going to keep your insurance. So they do make these decisions based upon money, but they know over the long haul what's going to happen. And think about this. No other business can say, oh, I had a bad year, so I'm just going to raise all my clients' rates. Nobody can do that. So I think that they're going to be held accountable. I also think that if you look at, I'll get right to you, that the changes that are going to happen in the Palisades, that are happening in Altadena, makes you really insurable. I did think it was kind of funny that like a week after the fires, State Farm came out and said, we're not canceling anybody and we're in the burn zones. I'm like, well, of course you're not, because that's almost as risk-free as you can possibly get. Are you going to lower their rates? There's not even a structure on the property. So have any of you talked to your insurance companies? Are they keeping the same rate? Are they lowering your rates? They did lower it. Who's your company? Okay. Yes, Sam. You gave me your card?
I want to follow, because that's the question I had, because the rumor is we're gonna lose in about a year, we're gonna be all dropped, and then we're gonna go over to the California piece. And my question is that going to happen? And I'm thinking that there's nothing left to burn, first of all. There's no more fuel in the mountains near where we live. But at the same time, is there something about the what's it called? The restoration, the justice, what would you?
Restorative justice?
Yeah, restorative justice, where they're gonna rebuild, hopefully with wires, underneath, electric underneath, and cut, the burn areas. What's the status of that? Okay, do we need to worry about losing our insurance?
No, worrying's not going to help you anyways. So this comes up in every fire, going back to 2017. And we talk about including it as an element of damages. Everyone's rates are going to go up, and we do. The truth is, in the short haul, your rates are not going to go up. Then they're going to try and raise your rates, and then there's going to be some compromise on it. Because your infrastructure is going to be better, my best guesstimation based on experience is you'll probably see some increase, but not a lot. But on the other side of that equation, you are going to have homes that are going to be more valuable than they were the day before the fire. And I'm not talking just about inflation, because you're going to have new homes. They're going to be up to code. They're going to be more fire resistant. You're going to have the infrastructure. It's going to be more desirable, and it's going to be less of a fire risk. So I think there's going to be a good outcome. I really do.
I've got two questions. So first of all, I think when you're speaking about the lawsuits, you're talking about mass action, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the first question is if you could please sort of explain to us what mass action is and how do the individual cases of each family fit within it? You know, the family A, family B, family C all have slightly different situations, right? And the second question is, what about long-term health effects? You spoke about 2 to 3 years for resolution. I mean, and we also heard about 9/11 as an example earlier, and we see, 20 years later, 25 years later, people dying, right? Getting cancer. So in 2 to 3 years, we won't know probably all of the health effects, whereas 10, 15, 20 years down the line, we will. So I know those are two separate questions, but.
Okay, I'll take them in reverse order. So the first is, what about the health effects? So there has been an avalanche of information about the toxicity of these burns. They're toxic because they're different than if a wildfire occurs out in the country. You still wouldn't want to breathe that smoke because you don't want to be breathing smoke. In this particular instance, it's a toxic cocktail because of what is being burnt. Lithium batteries, there's lead, there's asbestos, there's mercury. I mean, there's benzene, there's all sorts of things that get cooked, thrown off in the air and then down into the soil, which is why the hazardous waste removal is so important. Now, having done these types of cases where what you're talking about is two different things. You're talking about what are you exposed to, what's the intensity of the exposure, and what's the duration of the exposure. So in all the prior lawsuits, I haven't seen, although that doesn't mean it hasn't occurred, somebody who definitively had ill health effects because they're in a wildfire. Well, some people had smoke inhalation, some people had burnt lungs. Yes, so I'm sure it happens, but it's usually pretty acute and it's pretty intense. So what you're really talking about is a shorter term exposure, because if you were evacuating, but everything wasn't cooked in yet, so you have that issue. And then just living in and around the burn scar, and that's really hard to tease out. We do know that it's extremely harmful. I mean, UCLA is doing a study on this right now. They just dedicated a whole department to doing this. There have been other studies. So is it dangerous? Yes. Can it cause huge health problems? Yes. Do you want to avoid the burn scar until it's been remediated, including the hazardous waste? Yes. Now, come full circle. If somebody in this lawsuit comes to us and says, I have this symptomatology, I'm concerned that I had an exposure which is causing injury, then we get your medical records, we talk to your doctor, and then we talk to you and see if there's a viable claim there. I can tell you the hugest defense, because in all these like environmental exposure cases, it's the causation issue. Even in smoking, they contest the causation issue. Live in this, there's exposure of this, you live in the city. So generally, they're difficult claims unless you had some sort of acute exposure with recent in time, seeing a doctor, being hospitalized. But if like a year later, someone comes to me and says, I've now got asthma, those are harder cases. But we do look at it, we vet it, and we do it through your medical records. But really the most important takeaway is take it seriously, the health risks that are, going to happen because of this and are existing right now. Thank you. She sounds just like my second chair when I'm in trial. I forgot to ask this. Okay. So this is a mass action. So I'm going to start with that. So what's your first name? Nathaniel. So if your house burned down, you weren't in a wildfire, and you came to me and said, Southern California, Edison burnt my house down. We looked at it and said, you're right, they did. They had a surge, lit your house on fire. We would sue Southern California Edison for all your damages. We'd sue them for your house, your contents, any personal injuries, your emotional distress, that sort of thing. We're not doing anything different in this case. That is an individual case, and each and every person in this room has an individual case. You have an individual contract with your attorney. Everybody in your house would have an individual case. So what happens is we file a lawsuit. There's going to be a master complaint, which we'll finally agree on after a few iterations. And then so we'd say, okay, here's our client, Nathaniel. We don't file a separate complaint for you. We just file, it's like an addendum or an add-on. So we file, and then you get added to the master complaint. But your case is individual, and that's why we have teams that we've assembled, about 120 probably, with a lawyer overseeing it that works with you on your case, because it's still individualized. And that's true for every person in your household. And that's why earlier I mentioned you have to have firms with the experience and the resources, the procedures, the protocols to do that sort of thing. That's a mass case. The class action is different. A class action is where you have one, maybe two class representatives, and those are the only two people involved in the lawsuit. And they represent an entire class of people. Ergo the term, a class action. But in order for there to be a class action, everybody has to be similarly situated. Okay, what does that mean? On liability and on damages. And in these cases, they're not amenable to being part of a class action because everyone's so different. Be that as it may, somebody will file a class action, or somebody. So there might be one or two filed, and they probably will get resolved. Normally what we call those are cleanup classes. So Southern California Edison, for example, will agree to having a cleanup class because they want to fully and finally end the litigation. They want someone coming back 5 years, 10 years, saying I have these lingering effects. So they will do it for finality, but those, the people don't get compensated much in those. If you want me to go, I'll go one step further. Okay. There have been a few instances where the defendant might happen to know a plaintiff's lawyer that files class actions, and they agree to certification because it limits their liability. And that never works out well for the class. So in Maui, we had that same situation. It's a mass action. Someone filed a class action. Hawaii Electric wanted it. So the class action ended up getting resolved. It was for 123 million. And we resolved the mass action for 5 billion. So HECO, Hawaii Electric, wanted it because they want to, get the whole thing done. So anybody who's not resolved by way of the mass case of the 5 billion, there's going to be monies paid on the class action. Tort is the theory of recovery. The question is, what's the difference between a tort and a mass action? Mass action just describes the litigation. I mean, you have a large mass of people that are being coordinated in the same litigation. And we are bringing your case, what's your name? Tony. We're bringing Tony's case under a tort theory, which is negligence, and an inverse condemnation theory, which is not negligence. Well, it is, there's a component which is negligence, but it's a little different. So this is basically a tort case, the whole thing.
You can call it a mass tort, Tony.
There you go. There's actually mass, yes, thank you. Yes.
A little bit more of a technical question, but it's got maxed out my personal property
Okay.
damage with my insurance. Now, going into this, aside from the dwelling, which is the rebuild of my home,
Right,
the difference between what I'm getting from the insurance company for my dwelling and the actual rebuild costs, or the bid for the rebuild costs from a contractor, that's in addition to perhaps pain and suffering,
right.
is what I would be getting. But the personal property, I gave a very long and detailed Excel spreadsheet to my insurance company. But I didn't account for every toothpick.
Nobody does.
You know,
It's not really possible. to
no,
do
it's not,
that.
it's not possible. But what I'm getting at is, am I gonna need to really max out what we could be getting from the lawsuit? Should I go further and really come up with an incredibly detailed list, or how does that work?
Okay, just on the personal property?
Yeah.
Okay, so by the way, your insurance company's not paying you anything for emotional distress. That is exclusive to the lawsuit. And also, while I'm on this topic, you don't have to give what we recover for you is yours. You don't have to give any of that back to the insurance companies. Insurance companies, by the way, have their own lawyers who are also suing Southern California Edison to get their money back. So your emotional distress,
Not possible subrogation, where the insurance companies want to recoup their losses also. But that's separate from what we're doing.
so on your personal property, so how much have they offered you and how much more do you think you have to go? Like, is it $10,000 more or
They offered me my policy limit,
on the,
personal property.
then you're
They're
done?
giving- But the initial spreadsheet I gave was significantly higher, which I knew they would appreciate everything. So I made sure it was significantly higher than that, but again, not accounting for everything. So,
The question really, should you continue to build that list to recover more in your individual life?
Okay, no, because we do it for you. But that is a really good question. You just have to make it clear that these aren't all my losses. I'm accepting because it's the maximum amount. And then we will recover the additional.
should I write a letter at some point documenting this to my insurance company?
No, just say, I'm not going to document anything else because you've already offered me the limits. That's fine.
But just because your limit, what your dwelling limit, let's say it says 700,000. Well, it actually should be 770. I believe there's a 10% bump up they're supposed to give me. Just so you know,
For the,
for the dwelling,
for the.
you know, just the dwelling.
But that's for like building code upgrades.
Okay,
That's it.
hang on. So what you have,
For policy.
what you have to understand is you have a contract and everybody's policy is not the same. So look at your policy language. So for example, I've seen some policies where for the ALE, suppose it's $200,000 for ALE and you get 24 months. And I've seen other policies that say you get 200,000 and you have to be back in your house in a reasonable amount of time. So there's really no time frame on it. These are all matters that are born out of contract. So you have to understand what your policy says. That said, there are certain situations where the insurance commissioner comes in and says, you have to do X, Y, and Z, okay? But the insurance commissioner cannot increase your policy limits in any regard. So for example, almost every fire, the insurance commissioner extends the time period for your ALE, but the insurance commissioner never increases the amount for your ALE. And there's other requirements. If you have a burn down, they boom right off the bat, they've got to pay you 30%, they've got to pay you X% of your personal property. So
So Pat, if people end up deciding to work with our team, do we have access to resources for them to help understand their policies?
yes, we will compile the list for you. That's what your team manager, your case manager will do. And it's also important to max that out because you're not getting charged for that. You want to shove everything into your insurance that you can, and then what's left over, we will cover in the lawsuit. But that's a really good question.
What about coverage that's limited to actually rebuilding? Should people be careful about that in the language that they're using with adjusters?
On the rebuild, well, most of these, if you have a rebuild, it's going to go so far beyond, they usually aren't asking for a rebuild report at that point in time. We will work with you on the rebuild report, which is going to be how much it's going to cost you to actually rebuild the case. If they're asking you for that, I'd be surprised, but then you definitely want to talk to your lawyer. Definitely.
A lot of the insurance, our insurance company has a claims appraiser that came after the adjuster that walked the property
Right.
to have you describe what was in your property. And he was there like 2 hours with us, walking the whole property.
Okay, so
So
there's,
they submit that, as I understand, to the insurance company, and then they go back and forth as to really what the value is.
okay, so the claims adjusters, just so you know, these claims adjusters, generally, they're not from California. They're hired by the insurance companies to adjust your claim. They are not there to help you. They get paid because they protect the insurance company's interest. When this person's walking through, I mean, did they tell you it was to,
This is not- that's part of the benefit of our cap. But the claims, not the claims adjuster, but the claims appraiser. So he came from Iowa.
they're all the same thing. You can call them what you
Well,
want.
they're two different names, two different people.
They might be,
Independent adjuster.
the one from Iowa was
Okay.
definitely an independent adjuster.
Okay, that walks the property,
Yes.
that,
They're hired by
the-
your insurance. company.
exactly.
They might even have the shirt on, but they are there to help work up the numbers from the insurance company's perspective.
Well, they're only, they're working for you.
Yeah, correct. And so it is a little confusing because you'll have your main claims adjuster, who's your point person. They can hire these essentially third-party independent adjusters that put the State Farm shirt on sometimes, sometimes not. And then before we were talking about public adjusters, then that's a whole nother thing. So it's confusing to understand who you're even talking to or dealing with.
But you're not, look, you're not bound by what the insurance company said your loss is in this lawsuit. We deal with that. We get your information. We present the claim. We do need your insurance information because we know that that's not going back to you. So we do have to have your insurance information, but we're not bound by what your insurance company says. Question. Yes, Nathaniel.
I have two questions. The first is, you have mentioned public adjusters. How are public adjusters different from, I guess, private adjusters? That's one. And second, I'm not sure if this applies to anyone besides me, but I have California Fair Plan. How does California Fair Plan, how is it similar and how is it different from private insurance companies in all of this?
Okay, so number one, it is kind of a misnomer when you call them public adjusters. They are private adjusters. So I guess they're available to the public to privately adjust your claim. It's a misnomer. Right. So, right,
Representing my interest.
I'll speak to it. So Sydney Greenspan, for example, is a longtime company. They're called public adjusters because they work on behalf of the public. So they stand in your shoes as the insured and they take over the day-to-day communications, the phone calls, the hounding your insurance company. And you pay a price for that. Most of these folks are going to be charging 10% as industry standard. So as Pat was saying, you want to be not wary because they're doing anything wrong. They are being paid to be your advocates. You want to be wary because are you giving away 10% of your insurance money that you just don't need to be giving away? that you can get on your own. So that's the cost benefit analysis that each individual person has to make. And if you guys are able to tune in Thursday at noon with Sydney, she'll tell you it's probably too early for me. If you're on the fence and you're waiting to see what insurance is going to do and how the process is going to play out, you don't need to make a decision as to hiring an adjuster to act on your behalf until months out from now. If for some reason you're really unhappy with the process, you really feel like they're not providing benefits you think you're entitled to under your policy. But someone who has a total loss is more likely to be able to get full policy limits without the help of hiring Greenspan Company, because the insurance company, what can they argue with you about? Your home is not there anymore. There's just less for them to argue about. And I will do a shameless self-promotional plug. I was interviewed by LAist last week, and there's a really good article on LAist through NPR that just kind of lays out these different roles, these different processes, and when you might consider employing some of these folks. So hopefully that's helpful.
We're gonna just kind of like that gentleman who maxed out, right, on the personal belongings. He would have had to have given 10% of that had he hired a public adjuster, but because it was a total loss, he still maxed out on his policy. And yes, he has like additional expenses that hopefully he will pursue through SCE, right? But the way I understand it, because you're maxing out anyway, like it doesn't make sense to just give that 10% out to a public adjuster if you're getting the max payout through the insurance adjuster.
Exactly.
So do they take, let's say you've already gotten money from your insurance, right? Now, do they come in and just take the 10% over what they're gonna get? Like, let's say they get another 100,000. So do they get what you've already collected and the 100,000 or no?
Oh, that's a good question. If you bring them in later in the process to help you,
Right.
well, it's a matter of contract. Everything's negotiable, as Pat will tell you. 10% is industry standard. Some people I've heard negotiating 7%, but there's a lot of demand for these public adjusters right now. I would think, Pat could speak to this, if you've already recovered a bunch of money on your own, you should only contract with them to help you on what is outstanding, and that they should only get 10% of any outstanding monies that they helped you recover.
Okay.
So just read anything really carefully if you decide to go that route.
Question.
Along the same lines, I don't want to beat a dead horse to the ground, but my insurance company, AAA, said that they would give me 80% of my personal property, and I know I'm way over. I had heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that the insurance commissioner was gonna say that everybody should get max on their policy. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, and if it's not, and I'm only getting 80%, I'm getting pushback. Are you guys gonna help us navigate a letter or something to try to get?
Absolutely. So if you have a total burn down, he's saying they should just pay it out, because the underwriting that they do is based in large part upon the amount of your coverage for the dwelling. So it's all in underwriting. They already know what their exposure is. They know how much collectively in your neighborhood, what their losses are. It's ridiculous that they would ask you to do that.
Because the guy that came over from Iowa to, he said pretty much that he wasn't gonna, I was getting an itemized list together, and he said, I don't want it unless it's 50,000 or more. I don't need to just write it all up. I'll take it in and you're probably gonna get your max. But the lady that's AAA that I talked to, he straight out said, you're gonna get 80%, anything else I want an itemized list. So I'm getting two different, you know.
First of
Stories.
all, take your 80%, because they can't just say, okay, that's it. Take your 80%, and then you can deal with the 20%. But they shouldn't, they can't delay your 80%. Have they given you the 80%?
Well, they gave me a portion.
And the 80%, what it is you don't have to provide anything.
No. Yeah.
Right, you just don't want to sign anything or have any discussion saying I'm being made whole, right? You want to say, okay, fine, I'll take what you're offering me, but we're keeping this open. And speaking specifically to that legislative piece, they are trying to jam that through. So sit tight at least for a few weeks. I've been hearing that they might even be able to get it into the legislative session at the end of March. So this is a pet issue of Gavin Newsom's. He cares about this. So we could always delay too, right? And say, we're gonna ride this out a little bit and see what happens in terms of the legislative fix. Because they are watching the issue very closely.
Sam,
Where does FEMA fit in all of this? And then there's also threats from Washington that they're gonna cut back on FEMA.
okay. So FEMA fits in because they're part of the hazardous waste removal at this point in time. The issue has been that they're not going to test. They're going to come in, they're going to do the cleanup, they're going to remove the hazardous waste. Other fires, then they do the testing. And they said, we're done. We're going to come in, we're going to remove the hazardous waste. If the homeowner wants to test, God bless you. If some other agency wants to test, God bless you. So that's where FEMA is, what Washington's going to do in the future. I don't know with respect to that, but you also have the Army Corps of Engineers, you have California state agencies, you have the County of Los Angeles, you have private entities. And by the way, either way, your insurance company is supposed to pay for it. Just clear it with your insurance company first, and then your insurance company, because if FEMA comes, they're going to send the bill to your insurance company. Army Corps of Engineers will send the bill to your insurance company.
Pat,
That's why they're 6 inches now, so they don't have.
There's no magic number on 6 inches, by the way, it's just
No,
sort of random.
all right, we got a question on the Zoom.
Yes,
Will someone be testing the soil? I hear that might be an issue. I have a total burn down, and can you believe they are not they are not giving me the personal property portion. Plus I'm underinsured. I'm going to contract the Department of Insurance.
okay, so the first question was on,
Will someone be testing the soil?
will someone be testing the soil?
Yes.
Well, we just know that someone, at least according to Washington, at this point, is not going to be FEMA. Should you have your soil tested? Yes. Can you bill that back to your insurance company? Yes. So your soil should be tested for sure.
I did say that this is also something that Governor Newsom cares deeply about and is disappointed that FEMA, the first fire that has happened in 20 years, is saying they will not be testing soil. And he is working on this issue too. So who knows how it's going to play out, but it's ridiculous to have a fire of this scope and then not to be testing the soil. So hopefully there's a little bit of relief there too. Like Pat saying, it most likely won't come from FEMA, but perhaps at the state level.
There's a second half to that question.
I have a total burn down, and can you believe they're not giving me the personal property portion? Plus, I am underinsured. I'm going to contact the Department of Insurance.
Okay, so they should be paying. If you're a total burn down, they should absolutely be paying. So I'm going to ask, who's the carrier that is not paying on the total burn down? See if we get a response. In the meantime, I'll answer another question.
California Fair Plan, if you could, and then
So California Fair Plan is the same thing. Okay, I'll get back to that one. I'm going to answer Nathaniel's question first. It's like if you're in the assigned risk pool, if you have automobile insurance. Remember when you're like 18 years old and you couldn't get insurance because you were 18 and they threw you into the assigned risk pool? Well, that's what they do here. So insurance companies pay into the assigned risk pool, but it's adjusted by the Fair Plan. So the Fair Plan generally covers less than any other entity. And in the other fires, I don't know about this one yet, they paid the fastest because they knew if your house burned down that it wasn't even close to covering. So it used to be the bad news about Fair Plan was your limits were low, but the good news was you got paid fast. But that's what it's an assigned risk pool.
well, in my case, previously had safe code, my limit with Fair Plan was actually higher. I did not fully lose my home, but I'm concerned about the radiation, the ash, the soil, the long-term health effects, the water supply, the food, all this stuff that's gonna be long-term. Plus the roof shingles I lost in the wind, et cetera, but the house didn't burn down, so I'm not gonna get a total loss, that's for sure.
Well, they should definitely pay for the remediation.
Hearing a lot of
That-
folks say, Pat, that Calder is not stepping up in this fire. And I'm not sure why, but it seems to be that they're really slow playing people, not agreeing to pay for remediation, not agreeing to pay for alternative living, and maybe they're taking a different approach than in past fires.
Well, just like FEMA.
Yeah, yeah.
And the carrier was all state.
All state.
So, well, I would just say definitely contact the insurance commissioner, but they're gonna be so overwhelmed at this point in time. Just document, as Kelsey was saying before, and whatever you don't get paid on your insurance, you can pick up in this case. But I think over time, if this is a total burn down, it should be paid. Yes.
You said that the insurance company should pay for soil testing. Which pot of money should that, which liability limit should that come
So
from?
you have a whole line item for damage that's done to your house. You could have a total burn down, a partial burn down. So my house was a partial burn down. Some of it burned, the windows got blown out, but I had a ton of smoke in the house. So they paid for a company to come in, remediate the inside where they scrubbed everything down. By the way, it looked great. Just because your house looks great, you still have to have the testing. So you have an actual line item for that. Dwelling.
But I maxed out as well because the house. They're not even close to.
Well, you have also another line item for removal, debris removal.
I need that for debris removal.
That's part of
Okay,
the
so it
hazardous,
would go under
yes,
debris removal.
yes. More questions? So I want to give one announcement. So, March 2nd, we are collectively, our collective firms are having a party at the Langham we had a Super Bowl party. That was a lot of fun. And it's for the Academy Awards. I don't know if any of you are that interested. It's just an excuse, by the way, even if you don't watch the Academy Awards. Nobody watched the Super Bowl. They all watched the commercials, though. So, it'll be food, booze. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about with the fire, things related. Unrelated, but it's for all of our clients. And it's, we do it because I've noticed that it's very cathartic for the clients. And because we get a lot of good information from you that we wouldn't otherwise get, and we pass it on to our other clients. So I hope you'll make it. We'll send out a flyer. Yes. You what?
Yes, so you can see how not salesy Pat and I are, because we never mention this. If you want to work with our team, we have paper retainers here that you can sign and give to us and or take home and review. It's actually most efficient for us to gather your email addresses and push out an electronic retainer to you via VineSign, which is superior to DocuSign, let me tell you. Brandon and I and Jeff Ponting and I were just talking about this. You can review it in your time, call me and set a meeting if you have questions about how the retainer works. But if you're comfortable and ready to sign, you sign the retainer electronically. I get an email that says you signed it. And at that point, give us a week or two to make sure everything's filled out correctly. And then you will be transitioned into our case management software and have your case being physically set up in our file, and the process will start on your behalf.
Yes.
For the retainers, do you want each individual living at one property to sign, or?
Good question.
family?
Okay. So when it comes to a household, we want well, first thing, to make sure everybody in the household is identified. That's number one. Then number two, anyone who wants to participate has to sign. If it's a minor, then there has to be a guardian. It's usually the parent that signs for the minor.
And what about those who helped evacuate? So they were up there, wildfires were burning around, but my friends, they came to the house, helped pull things out.
They can fill out their own retainer, sure.
Is that like something that's realistic?
Well, they're not gonna have any actual economic damages.
yeah.
No, but they can make an emotional distress claim.
Yeah.
That's their personal choice. Have we seen people do it in the past? Yes. Have they recovered? Yes. Is it the same as someone who lost a house? No.
But it also brings up a good point, if anyone is renters or renters, renters are entitled to proceed as well. They're not going to have a property loss, but they will most likely have personal contents losses that they don't fully get reimbursed for, and certainly emotional distress claims as well. So they absolutely are entitled to proceed and should. I mean, Pat and I really feel very passionately that all of us have been affected by the Eaton fire, and anyone who has been affected should pursue a claim on their behalf because they're entitled to damages for that.
Just for the people that are gonna run short, the SBA does have a 2.5%, 500,000 on personal residence. So
Yeah.
you can file it, you don't have to have a commercial business. You can do a personal loan and that 2.5 is pretty good, so.
That's a great practical tip. Yeah, the SBA loan program through FEMA is a good resource for folks, and that window is actually going to close on applications pretty soon, March 10th or 11th.
Well, there's a request that, so California through the governor's office made a request, for $40 billion. And they also made a request to increase the FEMA limit, I think, to 600,000. And there is a 100,000 for personal property also.
We just came from there. They said 500,000 for a dwelling and 100,000 for personal property. However, the only thing that I didn't know about that I found out today talking to them is they want to see how you're using it. That you can't just take it and
Go to
do it for
Vegas.
something else. Yeah, right. That's exactly what they said. But because my question was, because they said you have to keep receipts for 3 years because you could get audited, they could get audited. And I was like, so when I'm rebuilding, how am I gonna explain whether this came from the insurance or this came from the SBA loan? And that's what I kind of see that it may be a little problematic as we go through the process. They really didn't have an answer for that, but that's something that I have to think about, how to kind of keep track of all this.
Yeah, and it's not very reassuring that they don't have answers. But you also bring up a good point and a good resource. Is the Disaster Recovery Center, have you all been there? The one at Woodbury, it's fantastic. That's a permanent location now. They've got FEMA there, they've got SBA there. You can request new copies of your title if it was lost. You can request, DMV is there. You can get your driver's license. It's a one-stop shop.
Wedding certificates?
Yes.
Anything that may have been in your safe deposit box.
Or you
My-
lost.
Yeah,
anyway.
my bank went down, and so I'm trying to recover all that stuff.
Our bank burnt.
I don't have
Our
enough
bank
goods to
burnt
put
down.
it there, but still in all, I mean,
It's a good
It's something.
resource. Show up. It's a one-stop shop. You also feel more comfortable. You're not giving out your social security number online 5 times, wondering, is this a legitimate website? So it's a really good resource. It's open 7 days a week, 9 to 7. I've gone twice and I probably will go again this week, but I would encourage everyone to do it.
I saw notice that starting in March, Sundays they won't be available.
This is the last Sunday they're open.
Yeah, so,
See, look at all this local community-based information we have.
and they get treats.
Another quick question, when we sign and we get the email, does that email, I'm able to put everybody in my household, or do I need to get 5 different emails, or how does that work?
It's a great question. So on the front page of the retainer, you can list everyone that lives in the household. And then it's probably easier for you if we send out a separate email to each email address for each person that needs to sign, because then they can just electronically sign and we compile it on the back end for you. But if you're, wanting to print out the retainer, fill it out, have people sign it, and then scan it back to us, you can. It's just more inconvenient for you, honestly. It's easier for us to just push them all out electronically and kind of have the system down.
So right now, people 4 or 5 emails?
Yeah.
Or can we just forward the same email to the other emails?
I can, whatever's easiest for you guys. I mean, many of you have contacted me on my cell phone, called me and texted me, and I love it. So I get texts of 5 different email addresses, and then I flip around and our team sends out the retainers. We're literally here to make it as easy as possible for you because none of you are living at home and have access to your printers and your scanners and stuff. So let us know what's easiest for you and we'll do it the way you want it. Write them down. I can email you and you can email them back to me. You can text them to me. Juliana can write them out for you right now. We're here to make it as easy for you as possible.
Any other questions from anybody? Yes.
This goes back to, I think, the young lady over there asking that she went to help someone clean out their place and whatever about emotional distress. Like my son came that next morning and he was watering down. We lost 6 houses on our street. They're saved too, but anyway, he was up there watching the fires, cleaning out, watering down the properties next door to us and everything. So are you saying that if he got emotional distress because he was watching his neighborhood that he grew up in kind of go up in smoke?
It's a valid claim. This has destroyed our community. A fire swept through our community. Like Pat was saying, are his monetary damages going to be anywhere near what someone who lost a property? No, but he still has every right to pursue that and see this process play out. And most likely there will be some type of recovery for all folks. The range of what has happened to all of us is dramatically different, but we're all entitled to go after it.
Right. It can't be because you were watching it on TV from, somewhere else, or you could see it from downtown LA. Not that.
So
When you're watching your neighborhood as you grow up,
Are you
there,
in-
grew up there from 2 years old to
Right.
47 and he's watching it go down.
But he was in the neighborhood at the time, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, he was on my roof.
Yeah, yes, clearly. More questions? Yes.
Dealing with emotional distress, how do you gauge or kind of, do you talk to a mental health professional and get a testimony?
Okay,
Question. How do you value emotional distress damages? How do you put a monetary number on what we're all going through and feeling?
okay. So really, this is what I talked about earlier when you're asking a jury about these things. What's if someone loses a leg, what's emotional distress worth? We know based upon experience, because we can look at it like you can look at the MLS and you can gauge it a little bit. But by and large, it's really personal. So if someone was under a mandatory evacuation and they evacuated and then half a day later, the fire hit their neighborhood, that's different than someone who's, running for their lives because they got a late warning and they're inhaling smoke. So it's going to be very dependent, but that's why we have a team of people that work with you. And that's why we don't just submit a demand package. That's why we create a narrative so that we know exactly what you went through. And you can describe that. Additionally, people always want to know, well, do I need to go see a medical health care provider? So that's really a personal decision. A lawyer shouldn't make that decision for you. I do recommend that if you need it, go do it. We'll obtain the information. Does it increase the value of your case? Probably. But again, it's a personal decision, and we include that in your packet of information. We include it in your narrative. And I would also like to say, because I had this conversation earlier with you, a lot of people really, really have a hard time with the emotional distress. And especially men don't talk about it. So I actually had a good friend who was a trauma doctor, Antelope Valley, and his house burned down. And he knows that I don't like bloody pictures. So he would send me an email or text with the bloody picture, and it just, to irritate me. But he was a pretty tough guy. And about, his house burnt down in the Woolsey fire that I was in. And first he said, I don't need, a lawyer because, I have good insurance. I'm like, it's not going to be enough. So a month later, he called me and said, my insurance isn't that good. And then I said, well, how are you doing, emotionally? He said, I'm fine. I deal with this all the time. And then 2 months later, he called me and said, I'm really surprised, but this is really affecting me in ways that I thought it wouldn't. So you need to pay attention. And that's why we said community is so important. You need to be able to lean in on each other, not just for information, but emotionally, psychologically. And early in is the best sort of treatment in this. Okay. Yes, Ron.
We are very pro therapy here, right? Like we have to take care of each other. Can it potentially help substantiate your claim? Yes, but honestly, it's secondary to the actual mental health benefits of it. I have put both of our young daughters in therapy since the fire, and it's helping them a lot work through it and talk through it. I'm paying out of pocket for that. We are also plaintiffs in this lawsuit, so those ultimately will be damages I seek reimbursement for. But honestly, the mental health is primary in this regard. And then, you know, the out-of-pocket damages are secondary. But telehealth is an excellent resource right now too. If you can't physically get in to see someone, we have friends who are in this room that I won't say, but they recommended a therapist of their husband, who my husband is now seeing. He's based out of Texas, and it's been really helpful for him. He fought the fires for 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday. And a couple of days later, with buckets of pool water, mind you, a couple of days later, he came to me and he said, I don't feel like myself. I can't think straight. I'm worrying. I'm anxious. I can't make decisions. And I was like, let me find someone to talk to. And he's had 4 or 5 appointments, and it's been really helpful. So don't let us box up this trauma and have it come back 2 or 3 months from now and we're not doing well. Dr. Stan.
Can I do a psychological homily?
Yes, please.
I'm a psychologist here in town. And I'm thinking in the most simple way, I'm thinking about the serenity prayer, which probably most of you know. God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, the serenity piece comes under trauma, and we have different degrees of trauma. And how do we bring peace and serenity to our life, whatever we have to do that? Because a lot of this is out of our control. And there's a lot of things we can't change, right? And then the courage to change the things we can, which are our own proactivity around our adjusters, and then also mass action suits, not class action suits, where we in my book, I wrote a book on the Wizard of Oz, and I call lawyers our lions. The Dorothy's 3 companions, the Tin Man, Lion, and Scarecrow. They're our lions. They fight for us, right? So and then know the wisdom of when we have to take care of ourselves, serenity, and then when we have to be proactive, and then have other people help us be proactive. So there's my homily. Oh, so by the way, never mind. This is too much of an advertisement.
He's located at.
Yeah, no. I was gonna
Yes.
give away my video.
Continuing on the current topic, but also circling back to something I was curious about earlier, are so the mental health, the trauma, but also physical effects like, you know, damage to the lungs, damage to the throat from smoke inhalation, from the toxins that we discussed earlier, et cetera. Does that all get rolled into, you know, stress essentially? I mean,
No.
Medical records, if you have hard medical records from going to the hospital, going to see a doctor, follow-up visits. I'll give a personal example. My husband was at our home for 2 days without PPE because we were in fight mode, right? And he had a hard time breathing and had an inhaler prescribed to him, you know, a week later by our doctor. So those are provable medical, you know, that's exposure. You come out of pocket for the inhaler or whatever, but you know, that substantiates your claim. You have medical records that substantiate that you think that something happened to you. So that is information we would gather and work into your personal damages statement. Having the medical records is helpful.
If you get an award from Edison, you were talking about that. It's just an award. It doesn't say, oh, personal property. It doesn't say, you know.
Right. So the question is, when you resolve your case with Edison and you receive your money, so it's not an award, it's just a settlement. They will not, no, they will not specify what it's for. Okay, any more questions? Food bar's still open. Plenty of time left to eat. Thank you all for coming. Hope to see you March 2nd. March 2nd. Oh, is it the 2nd? Yes, sir. Sure.
There you go.